Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus Show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. In March this year, the Sikhs for Justice Chief Gurpatwant Singh Pannu claimed Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal had met them in a Gurdwara in New York in 2014, where Kejriwal has supposedly promised to release the 1993 Delhi blast convict Devinder Pal Singh Bullar. The Khalistanis alleged that they had given $16 million to the Aam Aadmi Party between 2014 and 2022. Now, Delhi Lieutenant Governor V.K. Saxena has asked the NIA to probe Delhi CM Arvind Kejriwal for allegedly taking funding from this pro-Khalistan organization. Now, don't forget that former AAP leader Kumar Vishwas had also alleged that Arvind Kejriwal is supporting separatists. This was during the campaign for the assembly elections in 2022, and Congress leader Sandeep Dixit had also filed a complaint against the Delhi Chief Minister in a police station in Mohali over this alleged collaboration with Khalistani separatists, as he called it. So what is this Kejriwal Khalistan connection that keeps coming up? Joining me to discuss this are political analyst and journalist Ramneek Mann, Mr. Yashovardhan Azad, and my colleague Deepak Bhadana here in the News9 Plus studio. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Mr. Azad, I want to start by asking you this. Over the last few years, we've been seeing this pitter-patter of allegations against Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal and his so-called proximity to the Khalistani separatists, the fact that he's taken money from them, his party has received funding. How seriously must we take these, given the fact that many of these allegations are made by the SFJ chief, who's an avowed Khalistani separatist himself?
First of all, let me say that this is over a long period of time, as you're saying, from time to time there have been accusations against him. One of the accusations was that, about Devendra Bullar.
Yes.
And the other was that when he went to New York, he had met a couple of them. Per se, I would say I have not seen anything concrete.
Right.
When you ask me this question, how do you view it?
Right.
First, I would say that this is something, it must come from a credible source.
Yes.
That's number one.
Right.
Because if the Khalistanis are talking about these things, then, they have been talking about a lot of things,
Right. Right.
Justice, if you talk about that person who's been declared a terrorist, he's talked about giving 1 lakh rupees for, garlanding some shaheeds and things like that.
Yes.
So today, when you are talking about that letter reaching the Lieutenant Governor, and the Lieutenant Governor has called for an inquiry, well, it's good enough, the inquiry. But I would still say that as of now, there is nothing concrete which I can say has come again. Though I'm not a great fan of
Right, absolutely. No, but you must actually put those facts, and as you've done, Mr. Azad. Ramneek Mann, Mr. Azad just made that point that there is no credible proof, right? A lot of allegations, accusations, people having met and supposedly funded the Aam Aadmi Party. What's your view on this? I mean, how do you establish, a case, and how will the NIA go about it? Probe these allegations against the Delhi Chief Minister.
So look, let's try and bring things into perspective. So number one is that there was a person called Gurvinder Singh of Moga in 2017 during the Punjab election campaign. Kejriwal stayed over at his place for the night. Well, that's not a concrete evidence because he was the chief of KLF, Khalistan Liberation Force. The person was involved in several crimes, and Kejriwal stayed over at his home. Never mind that. Now let's come to the Richmond Hill Gurdwara in New York. So he had meetings, and the pictures of those meetings are out.
Right.
And the same individual who's seen in the company of Kejriwal, rather Kejriwal is seen in his company, have also been actively participating in anti-India and pro-Khalistani protests, and these are people who have actually funded burning of Indian flags, and they have been involved in several crimes against India. Well, if that is not credible evidence, then I would like to draw your attention to Kultar Singh Sandhwa, who is the Speaker of Punjab Assembly. During his visit to Canada, he was also seen having meals and meeting with pro-Khalistani separatist elements. So it's not just Kejriwal; it's also a battery of Aam Aadmi Party leaders from Punjab and Delhi who have been in regular touch. Now let's come to the final, the issue at hand. A gentleman called Ashu Mongia has filed a complaint to the LG, on the basis of which the LG has recommended an NIA probe. Now, the difference between an NIA probe and a CBI probe is that a CBI probe would mandate a recommendation or an approval or a permission to investigate,
From
whereas NIA would not need a permission to investigate. They can straight away go and investigate. Only thing that has to be seen is whether the case is filed under UAPA or NSA. If it is an NSA, then it's a very stringent one. If it's under UAPA, then also the prospects of him coming out are very bleak. Number 3, if the NIA is able to establish a money trail between these Khalistani elements or these funders from overseas, which is USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and a few European countries, as Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, the chief of the banned Sikhs for Justice group, has claimed. So I think you have to draw the curtains, and you should admit and agree by all these evidences that there is a lot of evidence against the Aam Aadmi Party and Arvind Kejriwal per se, because the money in question is $16.7 million as claimed by Gurpatwant Pannu, which turns to about 139.5 crores, which is more than the liquor scam. But it also entails, joining hands and getting close to anti-India forces, people who want balkanization of India, people who want to see India broken into pieces. That is where, the most serious, corruption is one.
Ramneek Mann mentioned the fact that the Aam Aadmi Party leadership has been seen very publicly with pro-Khalistan forces over the last couple of years, in fact, and there have been a lot of buzz around this. But does it surprise you that a lot of this usually comes around the time of the elections? Like, we are in the middle of a very crucial Lok Sabha election right now, where the Aam Aadmi Party is literally the only opponent that BJP faces in Delhi. How do you view this?
I mean, it's certainly a headline that, makes waves. But what I really want to get at here is that over the course of the last few years, SFJ and its allied organizations have been trying to make their mark in India. And I think it's high time that Indian agencies, the Indian government tries to figure out a way to tackle this. If they're able to fund or give money for a quid pro quo situation in India to a major political party, I think there is something deeply worrying about the state of Indian politics at the moment.
There's something deeply worrying, in fact, and I think the Prime Minister also mentioned the fact that there's been a lot of external meddling. Mr. Azad, the fact that a lot of organizations based abroad and countries would like to influence elections, as is the case across the world. There's been talk of meddling in the political process, even in the United States and in Russia, and of course China doesn't have elections, but major countries have always faced charges of meddling in elections. Do you see this as possibly one such case where an organization not very friendly to India would like to influence the course of political events by, seeding political capital for a startup party, for instance?
Whenever there is an election in Nepal, or a small country like Maldives, people talk about India.
The big brother.
The big brother. I mean, these are things which happen in the course of life. Is India so weak democratically that any other country can actually meddle in our affairs? Do you think they can make even any kind of an impact? Today in this world, where, we are perhaps one of the best in digital technology, we're growing up as an economy, we are doing pretty well. Do we have to bother? The other thing, which was a very important thing, Sandeep, Khalistan, is it an issue here in this country, except for some crimes being committed over here? Yes.
No, absolutely not. It's as we discussed in one of our shows, Mr. Azad, it's actually the Canadian Khalistan movement, as it appears. There is no echo of that in India.
Very true. It might help those people in Gurdwaras to establish, their preeminence and having their own kind of battles. The question is very, very simple. NIA investigates terror cases.
Yes.
This will be inquired into by them in a preliminary fashion.
Right.
Fortunately, NIA has the best men. Dinkar was
Yes.
there earlier, and now the new person, Sadan Date, is also an outstanding officer.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
they know what to do. If SFJ gives 1.6 or 16 million, whatever, it will be traced.
Right.
But to accuse, you can accuse anyone of anything. But
Yes.
to accuse anybody of treason, why would anybody take openly Khalistan money? Is he a
Right.
fool? He's a friend. The other thing, Sandeep, I'll tell
Yes.
you. Whether he meets somebody in Gurdwara, whether he meets anywhere in the world, it's not a crime at all. Supreme Court has said very openly that, if you're found with Khalistani literature, if you're
Yes.
found with this, is nothing, is not a basis for making a Yupapa act.
Right.
Unless it leads to something.
Unless it leads to something. But Mr. Azad, since you've been a member of India's security establishment, tell us how the NIA would go about this inquiry right now, the kind that the LG has asked them to undertake. What will be their steps?
See, this is in the form of a complaint. The complaint will go for a preliminary inquiry. The preliminary, fortunately, NIA has been given tremendous powers now, and the best thing which has happened, Sandeep, is that acts of terrorism, for example, Pannu has been declared a terrorist, right? So his SFJ has been declared a terrorist organization.
Yes.
So any act of terrorism against India, it can be investigated outside also by the NIA.
Yes.
So, for example, when you had these, attacks or threats against the diplomats, or it happened in London, NIA went to inquire. And only recently, you must have seen one of the Khalistanis who came to India was caught at the airport, and NIA had named that person in the FIR.
Yes.
So first is the preliminary inquiry. On the basis of that, if there is even slight here that the funding has taken place, then definitely a case will be registered. And then, it will come under terror funding by the NIA.
Right.
So this is a very clear thing. But the question is that of all these things, there has to be something, some basis. Now, if you're talking about $16 million, the time span, when it happened, and it has come up only during the elections, though I think this is being talked about a certain period back. Nobody will be a fool to take from here. It could be, it could be that it has been, it has come through certain organization. But why would they fund to indulge in activities of treason? I mean, what SFJ does is that SFJ tries to give this sort of small-time people to create some kind of trouble. Suppose that, that agitation which took place on 26th of January, those people were offered a lot of money by the SFJ. The Pakistanis were involved in trying to, and we had to block so many websites, the Delhi police. That is the kind of activity which the SFJ did.
But that question that you raised, I'm going to ask that to Ramneek. Ramneek, what Mr. Azad said, what would the SFJ and the Khalistani activists gain by funding the Aam Aadmi Party? Was it only a quid pro quo for that one person, a bomb blast accused, or is it to get a political party in India that's favorable to their interests? What would be the end game of the SFJ and the Khalistani organizations based abroad?
Okay, Sandeep, direct question, direct answer. You must have witnessed that there were several pro-Khalistani rallies where Khalistan slogans were being raised and Khalistani flags were being waved.
Yes.
This was unprecedented in Punjab, and this happened under the protection of Punjab police, and the permission was given by the Aam Aadmi Party government in Punjab.
Right.
So let me again take you back to 2017, like I said, that Mr. Gurvinder Singh, who was the chief of Khalistan Liberation Force, KLF. So Arvind stayed over at his place for the night. Third, now Devinder Parpolar, Professor Devinder Parpolar is an accused in the 1993 bomb blast case where he's awarded punishment. Now I'll give you details of it. 1993, 9 people died in that, and he was tried under TADA. And there was a quid pro quo, all right, where Arvind Kejriwal has gone to the extent of filing a clemency for him. And this is all on record. These are all on papers. Now, what would they do? They already have their, let's say, cells on ground, and you can see pro-Khalistani rallies in Punjab. You see a hype or an increased drone dropping of weapons and drugs and money, counterfeit currency and actual Indian currency from across the border from Pakistan. See, things cannot be seen in isolation. Ki ye kya kar lenge, or what is their intent? Of course, their intent is to destabilize India, and it's not going to happen in one day. It's something they work on for 30, 40 years, and this is a part of it. And if the money has changed hands, and if Aam Aadmi Party has been a beneficiary of it, being a political party, and especially in a sensitive state like Punjab, they are in power in Punjab.
Yes.
And Arvind is somebody who has a lot of influence. He's the convener of the party. So he has the influence when, the Chief Minister of Punjab can actually be driving him around, and he can use the Punjab state planes, and he can use all the influence of the government. Right. And then you see such hikes in, arms droppings and drugs droppings and everything in Punjab. So you have to make a correlation. It's a part of the investigation. Now, again, it's unprecedented. It is dramatic. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how you wish to see this, but it is history being made. A sitting chief minister is going to be approved by the NIA. That's an anti-terror organization.
Yes.
Now, if the money is coming from, let's say, SFJ, or it's coming from a banned organization which claims openly that it demands India be broken and it wants balkanization of India and a separate state being carved out of Indian Punjab, not Pakistani Punjab. Well, if they are receiving money from such people and a money trail is established, then of course it's a case of terror investigation. But also at the same time, we need to understand and realize that these cases, these events are very, very unprecedented, and they're very unfortunate in my mind. So, of course, there is money coming from overseas and coming from terrorist organizations. If this money would have come from, let's say, Hezbollah, or if this money would have come, let's say, from any other terror organization, would that be again seen? What would they do? Why would they fund Aam Aadmi Party? So my point is that when you investigate something, you have to see all angles. And unless you satisfy yourself completely, either side, whether this Aam Aadmi Party and its convener Arvind Kejriwal and others are absolutely innocent, you have to eye them with a sign of suspicion.
Absolutely. So so the jury is still out on that. Ramneek, we'll of course know in the next couple of days what the NIA does. And as you just rightly mentioned, we're living in unprecedented times. We've never seen a chief minister go to prison and continue to run the CMO from behind bars. And now we have the very unprecedented step of the NIA undertaking a terror allegation of terror funding against a political party, and there, of course, a chief minister is involved, a sitting chief minister involved. We, of course, don't know what the investigators will do now, but as Mr. Azad says, they go about this preliminary inquiry, and we'll be following that story very closely. I'd like to thank our guest this evening, Mr. Yashovardhan Azad, Ramneek, Mann, and my colleague Deepak Bhadana for highlighting this very burning question that we're examining today on the News9 Plus show. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal and his Aam Aadmi Party allegations of funding by Khalistani terror outfits. Talking about Canada, one can't ignore its Khalistan connection, and author and senior Canadian journalist Terry Milewski, an authority on the Khalistan movement in Canada, spoke to Geeta Datta on Canada's failing to stop the glorification of terror and how it's completely normal and legal in Canada to praise an extremist in the country, and the connection of the killing of Niger in Canada and the attempt to kill Gurpatwan Singh Pannu in the US. Listen to what Terry Milewski has to say.
I want to start off by asking you, recently we heard Mr. Jagmeet saying that we need to call the Sikh riots that happened in 1984 and the people who died, we need to call that a genocide. And then on Sunday we saw Prime Minister Trudeau go to a place where they were celebrating supposedly a cultural festival, where Saki is a festival that they were celebrating, and there were Khalistani slogans that were shouted, and and he seemed very happy about it, and he seemed to smile and all of that. I just want to get a sense from you. What do you have to say about all of this, and why now?
I think it's an extension of, it's the old adage: if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And what I mean is that, I've been covering this particular aspect of the Khalistan movement, particularly in Canada, for 20 years now, since they first started by putting small 8x10 posters on the parade floats at Vaisakhi parades, showing important Sikh Khalistani martyrs and assassins. And they got away with that. So they thought, let's try bigger posters. So then they started to put big posters on the sides of the floats. And they got away with that. Then they put a life-size glamour photo of Talvinder Singh Parmar, the Air India bomber, and therefore the greatest mass murderer in Canadian history, on the side of an important Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. And they got away with that. They got away with it even after we started at the CBC. We did some reporting on this and started asking politicians, of all parties, who went and attended and sort of looked the other way and acted like they didn't know about Parmar, they didn't know the background to it, and they were after votes, and they didn't want to emphasize anything negative. And so did the politicians at the provincial level, the state level, as you would call it, and it started to become embarrassing. But up until now, it hasn't been embarrassing enough for any one party to call out any other party for, as it were, playing footsie with the Khalistanis, because they all do it. It's as simple as that, in my view. That is, I can't criticize you for doing it because I'm doing the same thing, and the same applies to you. Many Indians don't get that in Canada, the United States, Britain, Australia, a lot of other places, free speech laws are taken seriously. It's not something that, India complains that you're allowing people to say things we don't like, and, we're going to roll over and lock them up. We don't lock people up for saying Khalistan Zindabad.
In terms of free speech, there has to be a line. Like you said, if there is advocating violence in India is again not considered free speech. You can be, you can speak freely, but you can't I can't stand up and say, I want to kill somebody, So
Yes.
I want to understand, what is the line that you draw? But in my mind, the line was drawn when you lost 300 people who were your citizens and who were innocent,
Yes,
coming home for holidays.
of course. And then, not only did we fail to draw that line, but there was a second failure, which is little understood even in Canada, and that is the failure of the legal system. Canada wasn't used to this kind of thing. We didn't know what to do about terrorism. We didn't understand how terrorists operate, and the legal system let them off the hook by saying, oh, well, that doesn't prove that he did it, and that doesn't prove that he did it. Taken together, all these 50 important pieces of evidence do prove that he's innocent, but the legal system was simply not sophisticated and muscular enough to win the prosecutions, except in one case, that is the bomb maker Inderjit Rayat, who, as you know, went to jail for almost 30 years. He served 29 years in prison. So people often say, well, nobody was convicted. Well, he was convicted, and he was the one who, as you rightly point out, went into the woods under surveillance by Canadian intelligence officers to do a test bombing 3 weeks before the real thing back in 1985. Now, the failure to draw the line on freedom of speech. You say, for example, that in India, it's not freedom of speech to advocate violence. Well, it's the same in Canada. It's not considered freedom of speech to go and advocate violence, but the problem is that it's not recognized in Canada as being the advocation of violence if you put up a poster and teach kids that the worst mass murderer in Canadian history is a big hero, a saint almost. That's we don't get it. Why is that allowed? It's allowed because, well, they allow it and they allow it and they get elected, and I want to get elected too.
Section 498A of the BNS says that whoever, being the husband or the relative of the husband of a woman, subjects such a woman to cruelty shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years and shall also be liable to fine. Now, the Supreme Court has now ruled that this marriage law is being misused and that women are using this to implicate their husbands and in-laws and family members. They've also asked the union government to take into consideration the pragmatic realities and consider making necessary changes. Now, why is there a need for a relook at this law? Joining me to discuss this are Piyush Singh, advocate in the Supreme Court, and my colleague Ashok Bagaria. Ashok, I want to start by asking you this. Section 498A, we've been hearing of the misuse of this law for decades now, ever since it came into force in 1983. How significant was Supreme Court's verdict recently on this?
Well, firstly, you have to understand that this is not for the first time that the Supreme Court has raised its concern over the misuse of Section 498A.
Right.
Now, in 2014, there was a very important judgment in the Arnesh Kumar case, Arnesh Kumar versus State of Bihar, where the Supreme Court made a very pertinent observation, saying that as far as this provision of law is concerned, it holds a position of dubious pride. And this law is being used as a weapon and not as a shield by married women. And this is not the only time that the Supreme Court and the various high courts have spoken about this law. There have been various petitions which have come in. The courts have been asked to lay down guidelines to protect people who are roped in by filing FIRs, by unscrupulous wives, and roping in not just the husband, but the relatives, which include her father-in-law, mother-in-law, sister-in-law, brother-in-law, and every conceivable relative who gets a criminal case lodged against them. Now, if you look at the legislative history, now since 1983, this particular law was enacted. It's been 4 decades now. And in the last 4 decades, the society has changed. But when in 1983, it was brought in with a very laudable objective.
Absolutely. There was that particular wave of dowry killings.
Dowry deaths all around happening. And the government, the parliament thought that it is high time that more stringent provision, there was already the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961 which was in place. But the government of India in its wisdom thought that we need to bring in a more stringent provision of law which will act as a deterrence, and not just act as a deterrence but will provide some relief to these married women who are subjected to cruelty, beating, harassment, violence.
Very laudable objectives of that 498A, Ashok. But I want to ask Piyush this. Piyush, you know, the fact that, as Ashok mentioned, that this law has been weaponized in the last couple of years by certain, a small section of society, especially women against husbands. And you know, I'm reading out this MHA, I was reading this MHA circular where it says that even when there's a divorce proceeding, this case under section 498A continues to persist because of the offense being non-compoundable. And it literally stalks the accused throughout their lives. I mean, how do you prevent the non-weaponization of such a law that's been brought in with very laudable objectives, especially in a society like India that's going through a horrific time in the 80s?
Right. So, Sandeep, let me just point out one thing, that there is not a single law which cannot be, I would say, misutilized.
Absolutely.
Or which can be used for the purpose other than what it was incorporated for. So, for 498A, yes, there have been not one but several instances for which the Supreme Court, not once in Arnesh Kumar in 2014, but also very clearly in 2010 in Preeti Gupta's judgment, the Supreme Court had directed the Parliament to amend the law and to look into it, that how safeguards can be there for the husband and the relatives which are there. But we have to be very clear about the intent and how in last 20 years specifically, the law has changed for the benefit, I would say, of good. So initially what used to happen, Sandeep, this was a non-bailable offense, and you pointed out it was a non-compoundable.
Yes.
And the husband, once the FIR was arrested, used to be taken into custody. Not only the husband, whoever was named in the FIR, if he was the relative, he was the brother-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, all of them were roped into the FIR. They were taken into custody by the police. They were harassed on a mere allegation of a wife. So as Ashok has pointed out, after the Anish Kumar judgment, which was a clear guidelines created by the Supreme Court in 2014, I think there are already enough protections in the law right now, because now what happens whenever a complaint under 498A is made, it is not converted into an FIR. So let me tell you the practical side, how the law has changed. So any complaint made by a wife against the husband or the family under 498A is not automatically registered as an FIR, but it is sent to a mediation cell, which is a CAW cell, Crime Against Women cell. And only once that mediation fails, then an FIR is registered. Even once an FIR is registered, in most of the cases, an arrest doesn't happen, and charge sheet is filed by the police without making an arrest, number one. Number two, in case a section 41 notice is sent to the accused, which is the husband or the family of the husband, most of the time the courts are granting them anticipatory bail and a protection is being granted. So that is number two. So the observations of the Supreme Court in the recent judgment which came on 3rd of May 2024 regarding requesting the Parliament to look into section 85 and 86 of BNS, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, how it is reproduced and to be re-looked into. I think the intent of the law, if it is kept intact, and if the Parliament can create guidelines or send, I would say, issue notifications to every state government, respective state government, because police comes under the state government's list.
Absolutely, yes.
Law and order. So if that can be done and protection can be created in the procedural part, I think to a very large extent the issue can be resolved and it can be taken care of.
Yeah, Ashok, your take on this? Guidelines, Indian Parliament will make it, a little more abuse-proof?
Well, the courts have done their bit. They have tried to blunt the sharpness of this provision of law. As rightly pointed out, that, now initially when a FIR against a husband was lodged under 498A, they would be immediately taken into custody and thrown behind bars. But now what the Supreme Court has done is that, keeping in mind the change circumstances, the society has changed in the last 4 decades, keeping those ground realities in mind, it has tried to blunt the sharpness of this provision by introducing certain safeguards, saying, number one, you will not immediately register an FIR. Number two, you will give an chance the particular case will not be investigated by an officer below the rank of Deputy Superintendent of Police. Thirdly, that in case their prima facie offence is not made out, you will try to go in for mediation, try to get both the husband and wife to come at a common platform, try to resolve the issues. But all said and done, it is right to say that, every provision of law is suspect to abuse. It can be abused. And no provision of law, just because it's being abused, can be struck down by the courts as being illegal or unconstitutional.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening, gentlemen. Piyush, my colleague, Ashok Bagaria, to talk on the abuse of this marriage law, Section 498A. In the last 4 years, India's leopard population has seen an 8% increase. There are over 13,000 leopards spread across India, and human-wildlife conflict has now emerged as an issue in the current era, and it's intensified, in fact, over the passage of time. And in a disturbing new trend, these big cats are moving closer to human settlements in major Indian cities. What are the reasons behind this change in the behavior of the leopards, and what does this new phenomenon mean for conservation in India? Joining me to discuss this are Dr. Shekhar Kumar Neeraj, former Chief Wildlife Warden in Tamil Nadu, and my colleague Deepak Bhadana. Dr. Neeraj, welcome to the News9 Plus Show.
Thank you.
Increasing incidents of leopards straying into urban areas. There have been a number of attacks, leopards spotted in very unusual places, housing societies, towns, settlements, areas that they were not seen in previously. Why is this happening? Are the leopards intruding into our homes, or are we intruding into the leopard habitat?
You have already answered that. So it's a bit complex problem, and there cannot be just one reason. Right. Because if I remember that when I was working in Mumbai as the CITES Assistant Management Authority, almost 2 decades ago, and even there was a huge leopard problem even that point of time. And the government of India had set up a committee to study that, along with some scientists of WII, and I was the convener of that committee. And we had looked into the issue of leopards coming out and getting into the human settlements, and then incidents happening. And then Pune, Uttarakhand, Bengal have been the cases with pigs. But of late, coming into town, certain places it has happened. It's not. It still needs to be studied. That it's a trend or it's some incidents in isolation. But I would say that I do not know about the exact situation about the populations of the leopard. Though the statistics, what you said is the statistic which has been also scientifically now established population. But one thing is also which we disregard sometimes is that what about the prey population?
Yes.
And I generally have seen in various parts of the country in the forests, there's been general decline in the prey. Prey of leopard, prey of tigers. And if you correlate prey and the predator, then the situation becomes more clear with respect to the population rise. So that factor has to be, I think, a little bit more studied and looked at with more seriousness.
And predator and prey, Dr. Neeraj, interesting point there. Deepak, you've been looking at this story very closely. You've been here in Delhi, in one suburb of Delhi that saw a number of leopard attacks. Tell us, what was the reason why there were so many leopard attacks just 10 or 15 kilometers away from the heart of the national capital?
So Sir has already touched upon the subject. So there are actually 3 reasons that we could look at it. Number one, as told to me by Dr. Sameer Sinha from the Wildlife Trust of India. So he observed that leopards have in general tended to stay closer to human settlements in comparison to, say, larger cats such as the tiger or the lion. A second reason for them is the fact that India has seen a population boom. Our conservation programs have succeeded in their objectives, but the natural landscape has also changed. So while the national parks are still there, urban settlements, human settlements are still growing and expanding into regions which were formerly, say, farmlands in Delhi.
The buffer zones.
Farmlands in Delhi, for that matter.
Farmlands.
Now you have societies and gardens over there.
Right.
The third thing is what Sir actually touched upon is the abundance of prey.
Right.
Now, if you look at a leopard, it goes after smaller animals rather than the sambar. So it will go after a dog, poultry, pigs. All of these are abundant in human settlements, particularly because of, say, the sorry state of our garbage disposal. And this is what often attracts leopards who don't find prey in, say, their natural surroundings. In our particular case, it was a young adult, maybe something around 3 years old, and it has been established that there are at least 13 leopards which are residents of Delhi. So this was a young cub which was probably confused, which may have come into the village looking for food, and then it got stuck as panic and chaos erupted around it as people discovered it.
The issue that Deepak raised, Dr. Kiran, the fact that leopards are actually caught between this in this grey zone, They can't enter the forest because of the tigers. They live in that buffer zone.
There are other leopards already in the preserves, so the younger ones have to go find new territories.
So it's a matter of territory. It's predators looking for prey. The buffer zone is being eaten up. You have human habitation coming into that. How much of a problem is this now? Given the fact that there have been a number of leopard attacks in the last couple of months, the reason that Deepak put this documentary together on leopards, the fact that none of these attacks have been very serious in the sense that no lives were lost, because the leopard, after all, it's a small creature. It's not like a tiger attack or an elephant attack for that matter. But how serious would these attacks be for you as a conservationist? Would you call for some kind of a study to prevent these attacks, to make sure that the leopard has adequate prey, an adequate prey base in its thing, it doesn't stray from the forest, and you re-establish those boundaries between human habitation and wildlife parks?
Important points. I'll say extremely important points because, as Deepakji was also mentioning about the change in demographics, the human dynamics, the city dynamics, the urbanization, urban dynamics. So all that also taking and making an impact on the leopard movement, more on the leopard. I mean, it's generally making in almost all the species, including elephants, if you look at them in mega herbivore and tigers. But the leopard, as he also said that, the leopard has got a tendency, the biological tendency to adapt to different kinds of habitats. So it is, it can go anywhere in search of food, in search of prey, in search of water. So, but then earlier time, the land use used to be such that, as you said, that, this buffer, the word you picked up, there used to be some green belts around the forests, and that before the cities and between the forest, and that would serve as buffer. So the species will get buffered, and in those small forests will still get at least a small place. Now, if you see the changing land use pattern in majority of the cities in India, you'll see that all those lands have been now being converted into generally the housing projects or some other kinds of urbanized setups. So gradually it's happening. It may not have happened very sudden. I mean, summer might have also, the intense summer months also might have been, triggered of sudden large number of on the high frequency of the deaths, of the attacks. But then in future, it also is going to come back. Is that, this, if the land use changes are, they continue like this, that you wipe out the forests between the human settlements, the growing human settlements and the forests, then I think this is going to become more and more intensive and extensive also.
Right. Very worrying prognosis there, Deepak, from Dr. Shekhar, the fact that if the buffer zones are already being eaten, and if that continues at that alarming rate, we're going to see more of this human-animal conflict. But thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Shekhar, and throwing light on this burning issue of leopard nation, the man-animal conflict that we're talking about in India. Over the last couple of months, there have been an increase in leopard attacks. Of course, you can watch more of that story by Deepak Bhadana, a News9 Plus documentary called Leopard Nation, only on the News9 Plus app.